Okay, let's go ahead and get started. A few minutes late here, no biggie though. We're going to continue in the book of Esther. We're going to pick up here in chapter 3, and let's go ahead and go to God in prayer before our study. Father and Lord, we thank you for the fact that we can gather together, that we as like-minded believers can come together in the study of your word. And Lord, we recognize how precious this is and what it is for us. It's a way for us to know the truth, not only for the things pertaining to our life, but the things that pertain to you and your long history of showing grace and love and mercy. And so, Lord, as we study it, I pray that we would cherish it as we should. And Lord, just bless this study. In Christ's name, amen. Okay, Esther chapter 3. In chapter 2, we left off with Mordecai saving the life of King Ahasuerus, and we spoke about last week at the end of the study that he doesn't do it for gain, but we also know that there's a reward for everything. I don't care if it's a good work or a bad work. When we studied the Great White Throne Judgment last Sunday, we realized that God is going to judge everybody by their works. If you're not a believer, that's how he's going to judge you. If you're a believer, you're still going to be rewarded for the works that you do. And so really when it comes down to it, you will reap what you sow. You do good things, and as a believer, you'll be rewarded for it. You don't want to be judged by your works, but we serve a great God who wants to reward us for the things that we do. And so really it can be said that doing right always has a reward. And that's going to be in the spiritual, eternal sense, but also here, as we saw with Mordecai, it's going to have a practical reward for Mordecai, because he does it in chapter 2 there, long before, probably 5 years before it's going to turn around and benefit him. Probably at least 5 years before Mordecai gets rewarded for it. He does, in fact, get rewarded for what he does in saving the king's life. And so it's a reminder we do things not, based upon reward. We do them not for recognition. And that's really, I think, one of the problems that we have with mankind today. And I think we always all have to fight that flesh aspect of the things that we do. Are we doing it for recognition, or are we actually doing it because it's the right thing to do? And that's something we all have to ask ourselves. All right, Esther chapter 3. Verse 1 says, "After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him, and set his seat above all the princes that were with him." If you were here when we did the introduction to the book of Haman a few weeks back, we spent quite a bit of time talking about Haman, about being from the line of the Agagites, which is most likely from the king Agag, which is an Amalekite. But one of the first things I want to draw your attention to is where it says "after these things." That's usually in the Bible, that's a way of saying that there's been some time that's passed, and that is the case here. We know, based upon comparing chapter 2 to later in this chapter, that at least 5 years has taken place. So in chapter 2, verse 16, it was the 7th year of the king's reign that Esther is made the queen. Well, a few more verses down in chapter 3, verse 7, you're going to see that it's the 12th year of the king's reign. So between chapter 2 and chapter 3, we can reasonably suggest that there is at least 5 years that's taken place, which is why the Bible here says "after these things." And so some time's taken place. And we see this man Haman, who is from an Agagite family. This is assumed. We don't know for certain. It doesn't say. We can only assume based upon the reference to the Agagite plus the things that take place in this book. We assume that this is from Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and that king is the one whom King Saul spared back in 1 Samuel chapter 15. If you remember the situation, God had told Saul to go in and to utterly destroy all of the Amalekites. Go ahead and turn with me to 1 Samuel. Might as well. 1 Samuel 15, and God tells him to go in and utterly destroy all of the Amalekites. Does Saul do what he's told? No, because if he had, and if Haman was an Agagite, then guess who wouldn't be there in the time of Esther? You wouldn't have Haman. Look at 1 Samuel 15, verse 8. It says, "And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and of the fatlings and the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them, but everything that was vile and refuge, that they destroyed utterly." And so if you go a few verses before that, Saul was told to take out everything. Don't leave anything behind. No animals, no nothing. Saul doesn't do what he's told. Drop on down to verse 20. Saul tries to explain himself and rationalize his doing. Man doesn't have a problem with rationalizing his own behavior, does he? Yes, we do. Verse 20, "And Saul said unto Samuel, Yea, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and have gone the way which the Lord sent me, and have brought Agag the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took of the spoil sheep and oxen, the chief of the things which should have utterly been destroyed, to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God in Gilgal. And Samuel said, Hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams." And this comes into play in so many different ways. How many times, and I've been having a conversation before study tonight, a lot of us come from backgrounds of people who don't approach the scriptures the same way we do. And they would just as soon as pull us into a different direction. And oftentimes it's based on practicing religion. Well, is God interested in religion, or is he interested in you obeying his word? He's interested in you doing his word. And where are you going to get his word? Right there. This is where you get it, the word of God. And so this is what Saul rejected. Verse 23, "For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is an iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected thee from being king." And so this is the backstory to who this Haman, we suppose, comes from. And it really is the only logical, explanation for what's going on here. Again, it doesn't clearly say that this is who it is, but that's certainly what we tend to believe based upon everything that takes place, because Haman, whenever it's told to him that he's a Jew, that Mordecai is a Jew, Haman's ready to destroy the whole people, all of the Jews. So it certainly seems to be that that's the case, what's going on. According to Genesis chapter 36, Amalek, the original Amalek, was a grandson of Esau. So Esau was whose brother? Jacob's brother. And again, we can't necessarily take ourselves back in time and back in history, but there is a serious hatred that those who are from the line of Ishmael have towards those who came from Isaac, right? That's going to be basically Muslims by religion versus Jews. And it's not a surprise to see that the same type of thing was rearing itself in the day when it came to Jacob and Esau. Those who are from Esau, it's not a surprise that more than one group from Esau despised the Jews and tried to eliminate them. And so we do know that Amalek was a grandson of Esau, and the Amalekites are the sworn and bitter enemies of Israel. And this was from at least in the recorded in the Bible, for between 900 and 1,000 years prior to this event. That's a long time. So the Exodus was about 900 to 1,000 years. The Exodus was around 1450 BC, somewhere around there. This is around 500 BC. So it's been about 1,000 years. That's how long, this, resentment, this feud, and all of this has been going on. And so you can go back to Exodus chapter 17 and see, and I'll go ahead and read verse 8. Exodus 17, verse 8. It says, "Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim." Amalek here is not a reference to the grandson of Esau, but his people from the Amalekites. And so it was the Amalekites who came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. And when you know the more of the story, you know that the way they did it was underhanded, it was cruel, and God was sorely displeased with the Amalekites. And because of that, he swore, and hear this. This is pretty scary. God swore to make war with the Amalekites. And I'm pretty certain when God makes war with somebody, you're going to lose. Okay? You're not going to win that battle. And so that's what he promised to the Amalekites. He swore that he was going to make war with them. He was going to destroy them. And so whenever you come around to Saul being told to go destroy this people, people question, why would God be in favor of destroying a whole people? Well, probably because those people were going to try to destroy the nation of Israel. And they did it not once, but multiple times. They tried to. And so God was, one, judging for something that the people had already done. But when Saul did what he did, this is why it's always dangerous for us today to rationalize falsehood or rationalize doing what's wrong, because we don't necessarily see the ramifications that are 10 steps down the line. Saul is as mistaken as he was, he probably didn't realize the ramifications for his actions. I don't know if Saul was all that bad of a guy. I'm sure he was pretty bad by the time David comes on the scene and the things he does to David, but in the beginning, I don't think he was, but one small step here and there, and that's quite common for us when it comes to mankind. David did it, Solomon did it, many did it. And so here, when it comes to Saul's actions, it was going to be a problem. And, I asked you in the introduction of this book, should Esther be in your Bible? Well, if Saul does what he's supposed to, one would wonder. But obviously that was known by the Lord, so what would take place? And so this is who Haman is and kind of the backstory on this stuff. And but he gets advanced to the highest place, one of the premier positions within the Medo-Persian Empire. Verse 2. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him, but Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Then the king's servants, which were in the king's gate, said unto Mordecai, Why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Now it came to pass, when they spoke daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew. Now we'll talk about that in a moment here. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath. And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had shown him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. So basically, Mordecai is going to refuse to bow here. And we could get into a little bit of conjecture here as to why that is the case, because it doesn't specifically tell us why. There's the usual belief system that this is because of the Mosaic Law, and that's a good question, except for it wasn't. Let me put it this way. It's not as though the Jews never bowed to somebody. David bowed to Saul. He prostrated himself before Saul. And so we know that David did it. We know of other examples in the scriptures And so a reference to David doing it with Saul is in 1 Samuel chapter 24. But when you go to Exodus chapter 20 with me, let's go look at what Exodus actually says in relation to what is usually ascribed to the reason why Mordecai doesn't bow. Exodus chapter 20, verse 4. This is the giving of the Mosaic law here. Verse 4, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. So you can't make a graven image. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. And so this is a reference here. This says that you can't bow to idols. In other words, this has to do with worshiping a false god or something like that. There are some historical writings of Jewish commentators, Targum the first and the second, who suggest, and I think this is very shaky information, but they attribute the reason why Mordecai wouldn't bow was because Haman was wearing an idol around his neck. Maybe that's the case, but who knows? But I personally think that it really goes down to the fact that Mordecai knew who Haman was. You would expect Mordecai probably bowed before Ahasuerus, but he wasn't about to bow before this Haman. Why? Why is that the case? Well, I think, again, the idea here is because of knowing that Haman was from the Amalekites. Go to Exodus 17 with me. Exodus chapter 17, verse 14. If we assume for a moment that Mordecai knew his history, and again, that's somewhat of an assumption, but I think it's somewhat fair of an assumption. Here's what God thought about the Amalekites. Exodus 17, verse 14, and the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua. This is what he's telling him to write down. For I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. For he said, because the Lord hath sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. I would suggest to you that it's probably more likely that Mordecai knows that from generation to generation what God's position is in regard to the Amalekites. That is what seems to make the most sense to me, because there isn't anything in the law that would suggest that he couldn't bow down out of a sign of respect to a man. He can't bow in worship. Again, we do see that even with the Apostle Paul. Whenever he would go in somewhere and people would bow down and try to worship him like a god, he would stop them. But if you're just bowing in the sense of honor, biblically speaking, there isn't something that says that you can't do that. Going back to here to Esther. I think verse 4 is an indication of the situation. He says, now it came to pass when the Lord spoke unto him, when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And so again, the situation here has to do with the fact that Mordecai is a Jew. Mordecai tells people the reason why he doesn't bow to Haman is because he's a Jew. That's the reason which the Bible gives us. Is it because, again, of the law, or is it because of the feud? Well, you got to be convinced in your own mind. I suspect myself personally that it's because of the feud. It's because of understanding who Haman was and knowing the situation with the Amalekites. Verse 5 and 6, what is notable, though, is Haman's reaction to this. Haman's reaction obviously is one of pride. And it's not enough that he wants to embarrass Mordecai. It's not enough that he wants to make an example out of Mordecai. He wants to destroy Mordecai and all of his people. That's genocide. He wants to wipe out all of the people, and not just those in Shushan, not just those in the local area there. All of the province of Persia, which if you go back to chapter 1, verse 1, is 127 provinces. It's vast. He wants to destroy them all. And I would also, open the book of speculation here and tell you that this here is bigger, I believe, than just even these two guys, or even bigger than the Amalekite situation. I think that this is bigger than just two guys that hate each other. I think that what Haman's talking about doing here, this genocidal act of destroying all the people of Israel, I think this is a satanic plot, and I think it's the same plot that Satan has had all the way back from the beginning. You go all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, whenever the curse is made on Satan, that the seed of the woman would be the one that would crush his head. And what is it that Satan has been trying to do ever since then? Stop the seed of the woman. From the very beginning, this is what he's done. He's tried to stop the seed from the very beginning of the woman. And what do you find? Right after Genesis 3, when that pronouncement, we're told about Cain and Abel. And how did that end up? Cain kills Abel. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us that Satan entered into the mind of Cain. But I think it's, again, interesting that Satan doesn't understand that the seed wasn't going to come through Cain, that it wasn't going to come through Abel. It was actually going to come through somebody that he didn't even know anything about, Seth. And so I would suggest to you that what Haman is doing is the same thing that Satan has been trying to do from the very beginning, and that is to stop the line of Christ. Here, Haman's trying to commit genocide, whether he recognizes it or not, but Satan is behind it. If you think about it, all the times in which Satan has done this, think of when Pharaoh, in the time of Moses, what did Pharaoh try to do with all of the males? First, he tried to get the midwives to kill him, and they wouldn't do it. Right? And so then he tries to kill him, and Moses gets hidden in a basket. God, through his providence, wants to save his people. And so Pharaoh tries to eliminate all the people. Herod, what does Herod do? Same thing. Is it any accident that even Genesis chapter 6, whenever you get into the situation with Noah and this belief in the corrupted line. And so you have all of these examples of trying to destroy the line of Christ, and I don't think it was any accident even when the Amalekites originally attacked the people of Israel along the Exodus. Again, I think it's Satan's plan, and it has been from the beginning, to try to eliminate the seed of the woman. Now, he's lost that battle because the seed's been born. But what he didn't know was that seed would die. So as soon as the seed is born and he knows who it is, what does he try to do? He tries to kill him, fulfilling God's plan in perfection. So one step behind at least each and every time. But one thing we know from all of those examples that we just talked about, is God going to allow Haman to destroy all the Jews? No, it ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. Just like every other time, God's not going to allow it. So, verse 7, Esther chapter 3, in the first month, that is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast Pur. Pur is where the term comes for the feast of Purim. Pur has to do with, as it says here, a lot. They would cast lots to be able to make determinations. This was not something that was only done in Persia. This was done all over. People would cast lots. I mean, they cast lots for who was going to be the replacement for Judas, right? They cast lots for Matthias. And so it was a way in which many societies used. And so that's what they do here. But what's interesting again is this is how the Feast of Purim comes into play, because why? It takes on It takes on the name of the fact that they cast lots to try to destroy the people of Israel, and the whole feast is meant to recognize the fact of God's provision in saving the people of Israel. So they cast lots, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. And so they go from the first month to the 12th month, and what they're doing is they're casting lots. Apparently, Haman was very cautious, superstitious, if you want to use that, to try to determine when the day, not to kill the Jews, but the day in which to go talk to the king, Ahasuerus, about doing so. That's what this is about. So they cast lots first to determine the day, and then they cast lots to determine the month. That's what it's talking about here. Verse 8, and Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people, neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business, to bring it into the king's treasuries. And the king took the ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said to Haman, the silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to thee. Well, what do you think seems good to Haman? To destroy them. That's what Haman's going to decide. He's going to decide to destroy them. He starts off with a false accusation, where in verse 8 it says that they don't keep the king's laws. That's not true. There's no indication that's the case. And certainly he could make an accusation against Mordecai for not bowing, but there's no indication from the scriptures that anybody else didn't bow to Haman. It's just Mordecai that didn't do it. And so this here is a false accusation, but the reality of the situation is that what Haman just did was he didn't just seal the fate of the Jews. Whose fate did he actually just seal? His own. You see, now he gets the ring of King Ahasuerus, almost like to seal it like you would to seal a decree. Well, with that, Haman just sealed his own fate. Because what happens if you're going to try to utterly destroy the Jews? How is that going to work out? Well, let's give a hint here. Not good. Haman has just signed his own death warrant. Doesn't know it yet, but that's exactly what he's done. Turn me to Psalm chapter 83, verse 1. Psalm 83, verse 1. I'm going to look at a few verses here that reflect the fact that the scriptures are very clear. If you're going to try and to conspire and to destroy the nation of Israel in that day, obviously God is not dealing with the nation of Israel today, but when he was in that day, if you were going to try and destroy them, it was not going to work out well. Psalm 83:1 says, keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom, which, by the way, Edom is a descendant of Esau, just like the Amalekites are, through Agag. Through Amalek. Gebal, Ammon, and Amalek. There we go in verse 7. The Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre. Assur also is joined with them. They have holpen the children of Lot, Selah. Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin, and the book of Kison. Chop down to verse 16. Here's what the prayer is asking from God. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek thy name, O Lord. Let them be confounded and troubled forever. Yea, let them be put to shame and perish, that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the Most High over all the earth. And that's exactly what God does in numerous situations. And he says why he does it. Because those are my people, and let the whole earth know that those are my people. And so oftentimes it's about God making a name or keeping his name protected. Look at Isaiah 41. Isaiah 41, verse 8. Now, Isaiah was a prophet 150 years prior to Cyrus in Ezra 1. And so Cyrus was, at the beginning of the people going back to Jerusalem. So this is about 200 years. When Isaiah is talking here, this is about 200 years before Haman. But you can see, again, how God intends to protect the nation of Israel. Even though they were going to go into captivity, God was saying, I'm not done with you. So look here at Isaiah 41, verse 8. But thou, Israel, art my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the seed of Abraham, my friend. Thou whom I have taken from the ends of the earth, and called thee from the chief men thereof, and said unto thee, Thou art my servant, I have chosen thee, and not cast thee away. Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee, yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. Behold, all they that were incensed against thee shall be, notice it doesn't say was, it says shall be ashamed and confounded. They shall be as nothing, and they that strive with thee shall perish. So I say Haman's signed his death warrant. There's nothing that can be done. All right. Go to Isaiah 54. Isaiah 54, verse 17. Very last verse. Isaiah 54, 17. You may have heard this verse before. It says, No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord. Who are the servants? We just got done reading. We just got done reading the past couple of chapters or books that we just references we looked at. It's Israel and Judah. That's who his servants are. And he's saying, this is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness of me, saith the Lord. So any weapon that's formed against thee shall not prosper. It's a shame that Haman did not read the book of Isaiah. He might have understood something, because it was not going to, wasn't going to work. And this is why this book is, referred to as a theme that's about the providence, the providential protection of God for the people of Israel. Going back to our text here, verses 7 through 11, there's this reference to 10,000 talents. I don't know if you caught that. Now, I don't know if you stop to consider that, but that is a lot of money. Back in Esther chapter 3, it says there, this 10,000 talents that Haman is willing to give the king in order to get him to agree to this genocide. He's going to bribe King Ahasuerus 10,000 talents of silver. Reportedly, this is best estimation, it's reported that this 10,000 talents of silver would weigh 375 tons. That's a lot. And would be equaled, and again, this is an estimation by some, this amount of money would equal 70% of Persia's annual income. So now think for a moment. Think of America's annual income, whatever number that is, and 70% of that number. Persia was rich. Persia was very, very rich. And so Haman here is offering a sum of somewhere in the magnitude of something like this. He was wealthy, he was powerful, which is why King Ahasuerus would let him come in and out. And so he's, well, obviously trying to bribe him to get what he wants, this genocide. And then King Ahasuerus makes this comment, which speaks a lot about his character. He says, "Do with them as it seems good to thee." He's almost of the millions of people that he's turning over to death. And not just death, slaughter, because if you know how later it's going to talk about how this decree goes out, basically it allows anybody in the province to kill a Jew and take all their stuff. And so basically, you know, I know that I've never seen it, but I know that there was a movie that was about, you know, I think it's called The Purge, where it was like one day a year where people could, you know, murder people. Well, that's kind of like what this is talking about, is that anybody could kill the Jews. Now, there was no right for the Jew to protect themselves, and you could kill them and take all their stuff. And so he just, at the drop of a hat, says, "Sure, go ahead, let's do it. You can do it." And that's why I said when we did the introduction to this book, I made mention of the fact, don't think that because of how Ahasuerus treats Esther, because it's very easy to see Esther walk in, and we have this mental idea of here's this beautiful young woman risking her life and going before the king, and instead of ordering her execution, he holds out the golden scepter and says, "My queen, what is it that you want?" And you may fall into think that this guy is a good guy. No, this guy, without any evidence, without any justification, just handed over the lives of millions of people without any proof of wrongdoing and without a care in the world. That's Ahasuerus. Ladies, maybe your husband's a good guy compared to that, huh? Yeah. So Esther's dealing with somebody who ultimately is a maniac. And this is one of the reasons why, what we're going to see later, that reference I talked about going before him when it's uninvited, really is putting her life in danger. Because this is a guy who's shown who will get drunk and on the whim, you know, get rid of his wife, his first queen, Vashti. He'll kill people. He'll do all kinds of things. And so this guy is quite the character, I should say least. Verse 12, Esther 3, verse 12. Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants, and the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province, according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus was it written and sealed. So they had to put it in everybody's language because they didn't want to take a chance anybody couldn't read what it said. You weren't going to take any chances. Verse 14. Verse 13. And letters were sent by post to all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. So basically there's 11 months between when the time that this proclamation goes out until this day comes. There's 11 months for the people, the Jews, to know that it's coming. It's 11 months for the people who want to do it, to get ready and to make their plans. Verse 14, the copy of this writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against the day. Notice the continual repetition that this went everywhere. This went everywhere. This went everywhere. Which, by the way, can you name one of the provinces of the Persian king that this would go to? Just one. Can you name one? Here's your, should I do the Jeopardy music? Judah, where Zerubbabel took people back already. That was a province. That was a province of King Ahasuerus. So going to Judah would be this proclamation. So think of that. Verse 15. The post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan was perplexed. And so note here in verse 15, you have the confusion. Above that, you had accusations and you had lies of Haman in verse 8. And the lies was about the Jews not keeping the laws. And so here together, this is why some people would suggest to you, and I'm not big into types, okay? I've told you that before. I know that there's types in the Bible, and I know that they're interesting things, and I think that there are things that we can grasp from it. And here, this may be one of those. But I'm just mentioning it to you for your own personal nuggets of information. There are many that want to talk about how Haman is a type of Christ, because here, what do you have? You have Haman bringing confusion, and who's the author of confusion? Satan. You have Haman bringing lies. Who's the father of lies? Satan. You have Haman bringing accusations. Well, who's the accuser of the brother? Satan. And so that's why some people, they'll reflect that here you have Haman being this type of Christ or Antichrist. But the truth of the matter is whether you want to look at this as a type or not, there is some practical ways that we can understand this, because this is how Satan works, even today. This is how Satan works. Satan hasn't changed his MO. He may have tweaked a few things with certain people, but it's the same way that he still does things today. He works through deception. He works through manipulation of information. He works through manipulating people. He takes false accusations against people, and he tries to bully people. He tries to bully people into cowering and not standing for the truth. And so the same techniques that we see that Satan has always employed is what he does today, and he tries to implement them. He's not trying to do it with the nation of Israel. I mean, I know he's trying to do it about the nation of Israel, but his chief enemy today is the body of Christ. It's the Christian today. It's you and I that he is trying to kill, rob, and destroy. It's you and I that he's trying to cause that wedge between. It's you and I in which he's trying to divide and conquer. And how does he do it? He does it through false accusations, he does it through manipulations, and he does it through lies. So how are you going to protect yourself against it? The truth. That's how you protect yourself against it. Is you don't stand for false accusations just because they benefit you. I hope some people in Washington, D.C. would listen to this. Winning is being on the side of truth, because that's the sure ground. When you have your Bible, that Bible is that rock, that immovable object that can always be the judge on the matter. Not our hearts, not our rationalizations. And so there are practical lessons we can learn from this, because if you understand how Satan works, you can defend yourself from the likes of it, and you can be prepared for it. Chapter 4, verse 1. When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out in the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. Pay attention to the verbiage there of how he was loud and such. We hear more of that. Verse 2, and it came even before the king's gate. For none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And verse 3, and in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, and weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. And so there's this reference, obviously, to sackcloth and ashes, which was common of the time, not just for Jews, but for most of the cultures there. That was common. It was an idea of having an outward sign of inward distress. It was displaying to the world that there's this inward distress that's going on. Sackcloth was made out of goat or camel hair, and so it was meant to be coarse and meant to be uncomfortable. And so you would put it on as a reminder of the difficulties that were going on. It was meant to be a public display, and not just a public display, but also a means in which you recognized yourself on a continual basis. It says they put dirt on their head. You ever wonder why? Even today, you might see that in some cultures. If you see, maybe some terrorist attack in the Middle East or whatever, you might see people renting their clothes, sackcloth and ashes, or dirt. Do you ever wonder why people put dirt on their head? Well, I wasn't there, as I always say, but from my understanding of it is it was quite popular in the day for those who were in mourning and were living to try to, in some ways, reflect the situation of the dead. Where were the dead? Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, right? And so the idea was putting dirt on your head as some sort of a means of identifying with the dead. And any other thing that from this portion here is it talks about the fact that he couldn't go in the gate, he could only come to the gate. Herodotus, again, contemporary Greeks historian, he says that the King's Gate was a place where petitioners would stand. And so people that were trying to petition the government, they would stand there and they would wail as victims of some sort of an injustice, trying to get the king or the government to fix some sort of an injustice. And if that's the case, you can understand why, if that was the way in which people demonstrated and if that was the way in which they handled themselves, you couldn't come inside, because then you would be doing it in there. It's kind of like today, in theory anyway, if you were going to go to the Capitol building, you can go there and you can, pay attention and you can listen. But if you're going to demonstrate, you got to do that outside. If you're going to make all kinds of clamoring noise and everything, you're supposed to be doing that outside, not inside. And so it's really the same kind of a thing, that you're not supposed to come inside and do that. And so, verse 4. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it to her. And I thought that was an interesting statement, because at the gate is obviously Mordecai and probably more Jews, because it talked about all of these Jews in all the provinces are doing all this. And notice they weren't doing it quietly. They were wailing. They were crying. They were yelling. They were demonstrating. They were doing all this stuff. And yet Esther doesn't know this. What does that tell you about Esther's life? Shelter. So she's not getting out, going on to Fifth Avenue and going shopping. She's living a life inside the palace and has very little understanding of the things that are going on. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. Then called Esther for Hatak, one of the king's chamberlains. So originally it was hers, and now she calls one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. And so now she expects to know, hey, what's going on here? So Hatak went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. Now this is interesting to me for a number of reasons. One, how is it that Mordecai knows about the money? Did you notice that? He doesn't just say, oh, by the way, somebody put up this poster that says they're going to kill all of us. He knows about the money that Haman offered. So that to me is pretty interesting. Is that, some sort of revelation in which he was given? I don't know. I'm not suggesting that's the case. But we know that Mordecai was already a man who was in position at the gate. And so he, assuming, must have got wind through his position that this was going on, that he was somehow told that that Haman was doing this. So it's probably a result of his position. And so, but I think ultimately, if it is a result of him in that position, one would then need to ask some reverse, engineering questions here. If this whole book is about God's providence for saving the people of Israel, is Haman's position at the gate providential situation where God put him in an exalted position in a foreign government? Now, you may say, well, you got any proof of anything like that? Well, I don't have any proof, but I certainly have examples. Daniel, was he not in the most prominent position in a foreign government? And he wasn't the only one. Joseph Whenever Joseph was down with the king of Egypt, he himself became a very prominent person. And most of us would agree in Genesis 41 and Daniel 2 that those were probably situations where God's providence, especially Daniel, because how did Daniel get his position? Because God told him the dream, and then he was elevated to that position. Nehemiah, we see, we just finished the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah is one of the chief men to the king before Ahasuerus. And so you have in each of these situations where Jews in very pivotal times were put in very prestigious positions in a foreign government. And each of those times it allowed the people of Israel to fulfill the situation that needed to be fulfilled. Verse 8. Also, he gave him the copy. This is Mordecai giving this chamberlain to go take it to Esther. Gave it to him, a copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it to Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king to make supplication unto him, and to make request before him of her people. And Hattach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again Esther spoke to Hattach, and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come unto the king these 30 days. And so, ultimately, what's this about? This is about the fact that if she goes in the king, it's risking her life. This isn't, anything, compared to anything that we've ever experienced. If she goes into there, there is a law. She will be put to death unless the king extends the golden scepter. That's the law. In other words, he doesn't even have to say kill him. If he doesn't hold it out, she's going to be grabbed and taken and executed. That's the law. That's the situation. And considering what we already know about this King Ahasuerus, it doesn't take much to get this king to be willing to kill anybody. So this is a dangerous situation. Again, citing Herodotus in his writing, he writes that there's only the only ones that could enter in without an invitation were the heads of the 7 chief families. They were the only ones, and I mentioned them before in previous studies here in Esther, that there was these apparent 7 chief families, and they were the ones that could come in uninvited. But outside of that, even the queen, nope, you better hope that he extends the golden scepter. Verse 12. And they told Mordecai Esther's words. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther. Think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house, more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? This is that passage that people generally know about the book of Esther, and many sermons have been written in regards to this. Is this such a time as this? And again, before we think that Esther had to be shamed into doing this, I'm not sure. If Esther was saying, "Are you crazy, Mordecai? Do you know what's going to happen here?" I don't even think that was the case. I think that, if anything, she's probably telling him, you know that this is the situation. Probably looking for maybe some advice on how we're going to do this. That would be my guess. But here's what I do know: that back in that day and culture of that day, a young woman would be married oftentimes at around 15, 16 years old. And if that was the case with Esther, this is a woman who's now 20 years old. She's only 20 years old, and she's getting ready to face a situation like this. And so I think that one thing that we can say for sure, not many then or even now would be willing to do what she's getting ready to do. I don't know how quick I'd be willing to do it, to march in there knowing that my husband hasn't called me for 30 days. I might not be in his favor anymore. And if I go in there and he's in a bad mood, I know what he does whenever he's drinking. I know what he's like. There's not many that are going to do what she did, but she did it. So let's not think that she's somehow being shamed or anything like that. But what's also interesting here in verse 14 is Mordecai is certain. This is why I think Mordecai understood his Bible. I think he understood the things that Isaiah, he understood the verses we read earlier, because he is certain that deliverance is either going to come from her or deliverance is going to come for the nation somewhere. Because he doesn't give any bones about it. He says that perhaps it's you, but if it's not, it's coming from someone else, because it will happen. And then he says this, for such a time as this, which, like I said, many sermon titles. But I tell you what, a lot of Bible teachers want to try to apply that today, and I think that's a huge mistake, but it's one thing that's for sure, it was certainly true then. It seems pretty obvious that Esther was the means in which God was going to deliver the people of Israel. Verse 15, then Esther bade them, return to Mordecai this answer. Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. And I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. If I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. Very, very interesting. We'd gone from a relationship where he had commanded her, and now she's giving the commands. And obviously, even from this point on, she's going to be somebody that listens to Mordecai and submits to Mordecai. But here we see, I think, this reference to Esther's made the decision. This is how we're going to proceed. And this is what we're going to do. And so that's pretty interesting to me. But the other thing I would tell you is just take note. Many of you, we've had conversations about fasting before, and whether health benefits or religious reasons or whatever. But this wasn't a fast like we think of today. This was no eating and no drinking for 3 days. No, not even so much as water for 3 days. It was 3 days spent in prayer is what it was. And so what's also interesting is this both Mordecai's expectation of deliverance and even, and we'll be done here, so both Mordecai's expectation that there would be deliverance and even Esther's comment that if I perish, I perish. Both of those are very remindful to me of Daniel's 3 friends. You know, the 3 friends, they're thrown into the fiery furnace. And you remember what they said in regards to being thrown in there? They said that they are very confident. They know that God is able to deliver them. And what does God do? He delivers them. And this is what takes place in this book. So, any questions or comments? All right, so 2 chapters, chapters 3 and 4. Next week, we're actually going to try and do 2 more chapters, 5 and 6, and I think that's certainly doable. Okay.